Thank you very much, Robert. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today. For this talk, I would just like to also do a lot of reflecting aloud about humanizing pedagogies. What I would like to leave you with today are some of my thoughts on this, and like Father Johnny, hopefully many provocations. If we end up with more questions than we started with, that would be just great. So I will use the 5 elements of the IPP to as the structure for my talk. Father Johnny has already told you about experience, reflection, and action, and I will just mention these also very briefly during my talk. In this triangle, you see the 3 characters involved in any teaching-learning situation: the content, the teacher, and the learner. Because we're not just teaching the textbook, what we refer to as content is really the world. We want our students to learn about and make sense of our world so that they can figure out their place in this world. We call this triangle the 6 E's, the Ignatian vision of effective teaching. The 6 E's describe the interactions among the 3 characters in the triangle. Teachers must have subject matter expertise and great enthusiasm and even passion about their subject matter and about their role and vocation as teachers. Teachers and students must have empathy for each other and must empower each other. But the interactions that must take center stage during the actual teaching-learning experience are those between student and content. This relationship must be characterized by engagement, deep engagement of the student with the content, and one could even argue spirited interaction and dialogue between student and content, so that this leads to student excellence, characterized by a more profound or sophisticated understanding that can be used for transformative action in the real world. The foundation of a humanizing pedagogy is serious consideration by all educators of who our students are and how they experience the world today. In the IPP, we say that we pause before we start planning our lessons to think about the context of the student and the world they live in. So let us spend the first part of this talk doing just that. We have Gen Z youth in our grade 11 and 12 classrooms and in the undergraduate programs in college. The older Gen Z are already in the workforce. We have Gen Alpha youth who have different characteristics from Gen Z youth. They're in our preschool to grade 10 classrooms now. And the Gen Beta children are being born this year. 2025 is already Gen Beta. How are they experiencing our world today? Their world is a rapidly changing, tumultuous world. Because of technology and the internet, they have a front seat to everything going on around the world. New knowledge, new trends, new lifestyle, and a lot of changes happening at an alarmingly rapid pace. A constant bombardment of news and new information they have to process. In a study conducted by the New York Times, most teenagers said that following the news, which they carry in their pockets and have full access to 24 hours a day, is stressful, depressing, and exhausting. a large-scale, in-depth study about Gen Z by Katz and colleagues in 2021 explains that the Gen Z have only known a world that operates at speed, scale, and scope from the time they were born. Think of this. Try to imagine the implications of this. The children in your classroom, this is their world. A world at speed, scale, and scope. And I guess the question becomes, is our classroom, how fast is our classroom able to keep up with that world at speed, scale, and scope? In this world, they're being constantly enticed and invited to avail of the unimaginable, exciting possibilities and vast potential for meaningful participation in a global virtual world, even at a young age. And you heard a lot yesterday and earlier this morning about the potential of AI that we still need to learn how to harness before we lose control. So I will not get into AI. I was happy that I didn't hear Father Johnny's talk before I planned my talk, or else I might not know what to write. But meaningful participation means that even young teens can start a profitable online business or advocate for a social cause. You know Malala Yousaf and Greta Thunberg. Melati Wiesen of Indonesia, 12 years old, started the social initiative Bye Bye Plastic Bags. It has become one of the biggest movements in Asia that encourages young people to refuse single-use plastics and is now a social enterprise that spans almost 30 locations worldwide. Meaningful participation means that even young kids can publish their work online for a global audience. My Gen Alpha grandson, Max, is now 13 years old. At 9 years old, he tried to start a YouTube channel. His first video was how to make pancakes. The kitchen countertop ended up a big mess, and actually he just used an instant hot cake mix. He only illustrated how to add eggs and water. But he did manage to come up with an informative and very entertaining video. Sadly, he never reached a global audience. He stopped when everyone in the family got so excited we all subscribed to his channel and then proceeded to give him lots of unsolicited advice about what he should do. I hope we don't do that in our classrooms. Meaningful participation means they can learn online, learn deeply about things that matter to them, curating their own content, and managing their own learning pathways. Lisa, my 19-year-old niece, was 14 years old at the start of the pandemic, so she's Gen Z. She was deeply affected by the total upheaval of everything that was stable and normal in her life. So I have to talk about the pandemic because it marks Gen Z. And she was overwhelmed by the online learning workload and keeping up her grades. She felt robbed of all the cherished milestones of high school life and being with friends in her teenage years. Emerging from the lockdown ushered in another series of upheavals, uncertainty, and transition. This coincided with college applications. She had always dreamt of studying abroad, and perhaps it was the 3 years of lockdown that heightened this desire. She did extensive research online about the possible courses and universities abroad. Father Johnny, BS Learning Science and Design, is in the picture. That's the GBC new course. She did extensive research online about the possible courses in universities abroad, how to apply for scholarships. She compared which universities and scholarships were most accessible for her, which countries and cities were economically feasible and safe, which courses were closest to her dream of being an artist and a curator of arts in a world-class museum. She computed how much her parents would have to pay if she didn't get the scholarship but became a working student, and how much she would have to earn as a working student. And she asked her math teacher to check her work. But that was just her own work. I was floored at how clear her goals were. She had a strategy, and she had backup plan A, backup plan B, and backup plan C. I was amazed at how she was trying to figure out who she was, what kind of career and life might be a joyful path forward for her, and how she could make it happen. And by the way, her dream has come true. She is now in Australia taking flying cars. I'm sure many Gen Z youth, like Lisa, have different versions, but essentially the same story of dreams, personal agency, that they're just carrying out via the internet, largely on their own. As you can see from Lisa's story, the world is also one of personalization. What settings you like, your profile, your stories, your passions, causes that personally matter to you greatly, your voice, your choice. This is happening outside via the internet. This engenders a quest for authenticity and a yearning to discover one's true self. And this yearning for some has become so powerful that it has also nurtured a sense of personal and collective agency. I'm going for my dream. I can do this, as in Lisa's case. This is a world marked by massive global threats, cybersecurity threats, political divides, the destruction of our environment, etc. I imagine being young today. I'm so glad I am a senior citizen. I imagine being young today as having access to a portal to the whole world. An exciting, wonderful world that is also fraught with risks. I imagine that the question for the young is, are you willing to open that portal and enter the world? Are you willing to enter the portal and live, I guess? If not, you will experience FOMO. But if you do, you have to use what is called a zero trust approach. Trust no one, verify everything. So this is the world our students are experiencing. Our students, as I hope I've been able to describe, value relevance, authenticity, personal meaning, a search for an expression of self, personalization, deeper understanding, social impact, and transformative action. And you could just run it through your mind and say, is this what they're getting in my classroom? Our students are not only minds that we have to develop, but have hearts and souls that may need healing. Being human doesn't mean being perfect, but it means becoming whole. They have experienced brokenness, fragmentation, isolation, disruption, uncertainty, and they have aspirations and dreams for their future. So let us now superimpose that profile of the youth on our triangle. So we can begin to explore, using this superimposition, how this triangle can depict not only effective pedagogies, but also humanizing pedagogies. So the design question now becomes clear. What pedagogies will allow our students, okay, not some amorphous notion of student, but our Gen Z and Gen Alpha students that we just described, Lisa, Max, to fully engage with the content and lead them not just to academic excellence, but to human excellence. Human excellence described in Jesuit education is transformative action in the real world, in this complex and rapidly changing world we have described. And the question about current reality versus the ideal, that gap, also now becomes clear. Do our current pedagogies suffice? Is what we are doing currently enough? As I try to describe this current reality, the challenge then is for you to see it with nuance. Don't just answer yes, this describes my teaching, or it does not, but ask yourself, in what ways might this describe certain aspects of my teaching? For example, if an observer were to enter your classes for one entire year or one entire sem without reading your syllabus, because there's so many good intentions in our syllabus that we don't actually deliver. So what would this observer say? Is the goal mainly coverage of topics in the syllabus with only a token or minimal or superficial connection to the student's world and lived experiences, with only a superficial connection, for example, to all that was preoccupying Lisa at grade 11? The way you can check this is how many minutes in your class do you give to coverage, and how many minutes do you give to the connections? The more we focus on completing for coverage of required topics, the more out of context our learning becomes, the less authentic it becomes, the less space and time to search for meaning and purpose. Compassion for our students. Yes, I think it is a big check for most of us, the compassion for students. But is the goal mainly the cognitive and academic development of the student, leaving the main responsibility for the spiritual, emotional, physical development of the student, or the development of the student's creative talents, to other units of the school who have been assigned these as their main responsibility? Should it be this way? Over the term, is teaching by telling, or even teaching by imparting our expertise and wisdom, the main teaching strategy, with teacher doing a lot of the thinking and grappling with concepts? I will hazard a guess that almost surely the lesson is being explained well, so that it is clearly understood by students. But is clearly understood also deeply understood? Perhaps the teacher has interesting class discussions around important questions to solidify conceptual understanding and develop higher order thinking skills. But is this more of an add-on than the main attraction? So that often it is just clear enough We have just explained it clear enough to ace the test. And little by little, this system has taught students, I guess also their parents and society, that the goal is getting high grades. The learning I can do on my own after school. Do we tell the student's story, the student's journey of learning, by means of a single letter or number? These pedagogies are all very efficient and pragmatic. But if we are talking about humanizing versus dehumanizing, many of these practices fall into the latter category. And we must admit, many of them are not effective for our young people today, who, like Lisa, have unique skill sets that they have developed on their own. Learning on their own is fine, but they might not be able to learn on their own the harmonization of Catholic Christian faith, culture, and life. And who might be taking over that role are social influences on social media. So, our current reality, in our current reality, are we starving or deactivating parts of the self in pursuit of book knowledge? Is it not dehumanizing when we put our students on such a competitive and non-stop academic and job preparation treadmill that they have never asked themselves about the big questions in life, have not been given a space and opportunity to do so in college, and have been actively discouraged, whether we know it or not, unintentionally or not, from doing so? Is it not dehumanizing when a person sees him or herself as intelligent, artistic, creative, brilliant, and then goes to a school where there is no space to express any of these pieces of this core self, or when experiences of that core self are threatened? When students instead learn just the opposite, I'm not smart enough, my ideas are not worth sharing, my voice is not worth hearing. Polyfaith and colleagues found in their series of studies in Melbourne that Catholic schools use a pedagogy that does not stand the test when life shows its complexities and vulnerabilities, and recommended the use of pedagogies that include challenging and interruptive experiences like not knowing, doubt, silence, mystery, struggle, resistance, estrangement, loss of meaning, tragedy, and brokenness. So, how humanizing are our current classrooms? Or how dehumanizing are they without us wanting them to be, without us having intended that they be dehumanizing? In our classroom, therefore, we operate within a triangle that is much smaller than the actual world our students live in. Largely depending on how much smaller this triangle is in your school or classroom, that is farther removed or farther out of context from the actual world of the student, and largely because of the solid black dividing line between the smaller triangle and the actual world of the student, can we perhaps say that education today is in many respects dehumanizing? So please turn now to your neighbor and ask, how big or how small is your triangle? How willing are you to look for ways, and we want to emphasize that the small ways actually are often the best ways to humanize your classroom further. So please talk to your seat. So, I hope you had a good discussion, and I hope you continue this discussion even beyond our session today. So, what are humanizing pedagogies? In the previous quotes, we find a few key characteristics of humanizing pedagogies: space and opportunity to express pieces of one's core self, to ask the big questions of life. The identity of the Catholic Schools for a Culture of Dialogue in 2022 speaks of the soul of each learner and reminds us that in a Catholic school, reason enters into dialogue with faith, which also allows access to truths that transcend the mere data of the empirical and rational sciences in order to open up to the whole of truth so as to respond to the deepest questions of the human soul. Parker Palmer tells us being human has to do with each of us having a soul that makes us who we are. He explains that when students want to meet expectations, to succeed in the way the world defines success, then they become separated from their own souls to protect themselves. They live divided lives and eventually disappear into the roles expected of them by parents, teachers, etc. So let us ask some questions that can prompt our reflection on humanizing pedagogy. The answers cannot come from me. First, I do not know many of the answers. Second, they must be your answers. Based on your empathy and love for your students, they must come from your reflection and perhaps a collective reflection, a community reflection in your schools, in the context of your schools and the unique human persons that are in your classrooms. I have a tip though that may help you answer these questions. The answers may not always be something the school administrators or the National Ministry of Education have to do. The best answers are likely small changes, but extremely powerful changes that we can make in our classrooms to our current teaching practices. So, some reflection questions. How can we better tell the story about all their achievements and failures, their effort, their learning journey, their personal growth throughout a school year instead of just a single letter or numerical grade? Please, it is not changing your grading system to a long description written by the teacher for each child. That's not humanizing for us teachers. There are other ways. We have to think of it a showcase of work pegged to learning outcomes, not just a showcase of artistry, but a showcase pegged to learning outcomes, something like that, right? How can we modify our courses so that they're really geared towards the attainment of the abilities and performances and mindsets they will need in this world? And Father John already posed one important question along that line earlier. Are what we are teaching them, our curriculum, pedagogy, school systems, and operations, teaching mindsets and norms designed for a world that has all but disappeared? How can we change the mindset that there is a divide between rigorous pedagogies and humanizing pedagogies? How is Catholic education helping this generation of students in this tumultuous world to square these new realities that they are living through with their Catholic faith? If not, as I said earlier, is that guidance being provided through social media by who knows who? What legacy is their Catholic education giving them that will allow them to navigate this world and carry on transformative action in this world the way Catholics should? How can Catholic education connect to something very personal and meaningful to each student? What has happened to teaching the Catholic imagination that makes it possible to be loving, hopeful, grateful, and committed to making a change in a world in turmoil? We all work within educational systems that may be beyond our sphere of influence to change. So, just this last part of my talk will be to discuss how we can humanize pedagogy within the system. Knowledge of the context of each student, each human person in the class, and their world is foundational to all instruction. This must be considered throughout the design and delivery of instruction. The element of evaluation via ongoing formative assessment must also be applied throughout. An ongoing evaluation of student progress and an ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness of your instructional design so that you can immediately adapt as needed to meet students where they are. Meet students where they are, not keep up with the class or else. Experience as defined in the IPP is any activity which leads the student to an intellectual and affective grasp of the subject being studied. I believe that this is the definition of a humanizing experience too. A field trip is good, but this can be a lecture or video or a photo gallery that allows the students a vicarious but nevertheless penetrating, close-up look at the topic's relation to current issues. This is for statistics in grade 7, 12-year-olds about designing surveys. So the reflection of the teacher is, the reflection questions are about when should you use percent? When should you use the mean? Are your terms clear? What does being religious mean versus being spiritual? So you can start to embed these things more naturally in a math class, even for grade 7. What stories do these numbers tell? Whose stories are not represented here? Experiences designed so that students will slow down, observe closely, take in the moment, ask curious questions. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? This was for the same statistics class, by the way, used to look at data on child slavery. An experience humanizes when it teaches students to navigate ambiguity and uncertainty that will certainly come up if you show pictures and discuss modern-day child slavery, for example, in a math class. So we need to teach them to be mindful of their thoughts and emotions. Teach them that it's okay if some big questions don't have answers that are very clear and definite, but accompany them through these moments. Give them a safe space to talk about their emotions. Don't fix, invalidate, overcomplicate, or oversimplify. The IPP element of reflection refers to a thoughtful reconsideration in order to grasp its significance more fully, the process by which meaning surfaces in human experience. The Ignatian secret key ingredient for a humanizing experience. Reflection involves conversations, honest ones, often longish conversations because you can't rush understanding. Conversations with self, with others, with content, on maybe uncomfortable conversations. Important because it is in these conversations that deep understanding begins, and more importantly, where the I, where the human soul emerges. Reflection also involves being curious, using one's imagination, asking what if, why not? And of course, pause, presence, and mindfulness. Lots of silent time too, to become comfortable with silence. And as Parker Palmer says, there are places in the landscape of our lives where no one can accompany us, and it is our inner teacher that must teach us. The ultimate aim of Jesuit education is action, the last IPP element. Without action, the fruits of IPP reflection have nowhere to go. It would have just been an academic exercise. So how can we work for action in ways that are humanizing? How about if we build an ethic of excellence? Ron Berger poses this very question in his book, An Ethic of Excellence. And I would like to suggest this as a humanizing pedagogy. Their schools, the expeditionary learning schools, use the concept of passion for beautiful work and developing the conditions that can make this work possible as an entry point to building this ethic of excellence. You can see that from the way he signs copies of his books. He took the trouble to do this, chatting with me while doing the calligraphy. I felt recognized and valued, even if I was just one person he had never met, in line for his autograph. Don't get me wrong, it's not about the aesthetics. We tend to get carried away, especially in the elementary. As part of their concept of beautiful work, most of the projects and work the students do involve deep exploration about problems in the community. For example, a grade 4 unit on crossing borders in a school in New Hampshire. And this involved interviews and coaching by the Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Service, and interviews with the child refugees themselves. The expectation for each student is that each one can be a craftsman, and they are supported in this endeavor, like the numerous cycles of feedback and revision that Austin, the grade 1 boy, whose scientific drawing of the tiger swallowtail butterfly you see here, that started off as the butterfly in the top left corner, and after feedback given by the peers, finally became butterfly in the bottom right corner. The support was through the rubrics. Feedback, butterfly 2, 3, and 4 was just about the shape of the wings. For butterfly 5, he got feedback about the patterns. Take your rubrics seriously, not as tools for assessing, but tools for teaching. Berger describes it as the kind of work that you must do more slowly and thoughtfully. The kind of work that you have to be present for and fully engaged with to be able to do excellently. An ethic and ethos that treats all work, all learning, the world that you are learning about, the people you work with, the people who will look at your work, all that is treated with reverence. He believes that an ethic of excellence is transformational. Once a student sees that he or she is capable of excellence, the student is never quite the same. So, a parting reflection exercise in conclusion. As a conversation starter with colleagues, try your hand at expanding the 6 E's triangle as closely as you can get to the learner's actual world. So these are just some of my, what could the student's role be? Who are the teachers in our world today? What are the teachers' roles? You will never match it exactly, but this is worth a professional conversation. In summary, or rather a summary of sorts, there's one thing we can do that will be very simple but very hard. Not a big project or craft a whole new policy, things that we might not be able to sustain. It is to slow down instruction. That, I think, is going to make a world of difference. We are doing too much, going too fast. No time to let the inner teacher of each student show up. Lisa told me that in her school, she is learning so much, but she finds she has so much time on her hands compared to when she was studying here in the Philippines. She runs every day and can now do 10K. Her eczema has disappeared and she has made so many friends. So let us focus on impact, not quality. I will end with something my husband always tells me. He will be very amused that I gave him the last word for this talk. Whenever I say my knees feel sore and I feel heavy, he says, "Go get some exercise," and I always say, "I will try." And he always says, "Do or do not, there is no try." So I will tell him, I gave him the last word during this talk. Thank you.